I'm going to hand it over to Samantha Pohl, our development director, to introduce this program.
Great.
Thank you, Evan, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. As Evan said, I'm Samantha Pohl, our development director, and we're glad to have you today to talk about some of the results of the Israeli elections. We have with us today two fantastic contributors to our election site, Tal Shalev and Evan Gottesman. If you haven't already visited our election site, I encourage you to do so. I think they're going to give us a fantastic sort of recount of what went down. And just a quick reminder before I turn it over to Evan, who's going to be moderating. Tonight is our final Across the Divide panel examining the religious divides over Israel at Temple Emmanuel Stryker Center. If you haven't signed up already and live in the New York area, I highly encourage you to attend. And if not, it will be live streamed. You can catch the live stream on both Twitter and Facebook. And with that, thanks everyone for joining, and I'll turn it over to Evan.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you, Tal, for joining us on this call. Real quick, I want to introduce Tal. Tal Shalev is Walla News political correspondent, and she's been contributing to our 120 project, our elections resource, as a guest on our podcast, contributing articles to our Israel Policy Exchange blog. And we're really happy to have her here today to give a recap of the Israeli elections, which happened on Tuesday. And for those who were watching the elections, we saw Netanyahu come out in a position where he appears poised to be able to form another government, but there's still a lot of things that are in flux and still a lot that we may have questions about. So the first thing I wanted to address, or I hope that you could address for us, Tal, is just your general takeaways from what happened on Tuesday.
So I think the most general takeaway out of this election is basically that Netanyahu started this election in a very challenging situation with two very big hurdles or things that could have hurt him. The first one was the Attorney General's decision to indict him on 3 different files, of course, conditioned by a hearing. And the other big event was this bang in the center-left bloc and the formation of the Blue and White Party, and the fact that for the first time ever, I mean not ever, but the first time in ages, especially in the last decade, we had a candidate who was close to Netanyahu in the approval ratings on how suitable he is to be prime minister. And at some point at the election, political logic would assume that it would be difficult for Netanyahu to win this election, A, because of the luring indictments, and B, because he has a real candidate and opponent against him this time. And at the end of the day, the final results, even though we're still waiting for the final results, at the end of the day, one thing is clear, is that Netanyahu came back stronger than ever. The Likud is the result of the Likud, 35 seats, is the most seats they've had in the past decade. And Netanyahu basically now faces a choice between a very right-wing government, a very right-wing ultra-Orthodox government, and on the other hand, the decision which seems less likely to go into a national unity government with blue and white. As I said, we're still counting the results, and the final results may have a difference on how stable a right-wing government that Netanyahu is planning to establish, how stable that government can be. But definitely Netanyahu is the big victor of this whole election. And I would say that the big loser is not necessarily Gantz, but the whole center-left bloc, who once again failed to beat Netanyahu, and not only that, also has suffered a severe blow, especially in the real leftist parties, the Labor Party and Meretz Party, which both of them basically lost seats or were in a struggle against the Blue and White Party, who basically took away all of the left-wing voters who really wanted a change and really wanted to replace Netanyahu, but that didn't work. So on the one hand, we have Bibi as a big winner, and I would say the left the liberal left is the big loser. Also, if we look at Netanyahu's proposed government or suggested government, which would be a right-wing coalition, it's more religious than it was, it's more right-wing than it was, it's more fundamentalist than it was, it's much more masculine than it was. So at large, I think that the liberal camp in Israel has suffered a severe blow from these elections.
You talk about the blow that the left took in this election, and I think nowhere was that more evident than in what happened to the Labor Party, which was the party of power in Israel for 30 years, even performed fairly well last election with 19 seats, 24 total with the whole Zionist Union alliance, now has fallen to 6 seats. What do you think happened there? Why did they underperform so badly in this election?
So it's a complicated answer. First of all, it has to do with the fact that Avi Gabay, when he was elected to the party in 2017, he was considered a promise. The promise of he at the beginning, he got very high ratings. He got 20, 22 seats, 24 seats in the polls. And he was considered someone who would bring a new spirit to the Labor Party. But very early on, it appeared evident that Avi Gabay is not a real Labor Party ideologist, and very early on he got into big trouble with his base, because basically he started basically trying to appeal to right-wing voters and abandon the whole peace agenda and the anti-settlement agenda. And I think that was the beginning of the end, even 3 months after he was elected. After that, he had very, very bad relationships with his own party, and he didn't succeed to really, get grasp of his own party. After that, he made a very miserable decision to fire Tzipi Livni and break up the Zionist Union. And this all happened even before Benny Gantz started to occur as this mega prime minister opponent or mega opponent to Netanyahu. Another thing, which I guess that would be the historic mistake that Avi Gabay did, is that basically Avi Gabay about half a year ago, he approached Benny Gantz and he offered him to join the Labor Party. And Benny Gantz didn't want to join the Labor Party, and Avi Gabay didn't succeed to convince him to join the Labor Party. If we could only think, speculate, what if Benny Gantz would have joined the Labor Party and Avi Gabay would have given up his first seat and given it to Benny Gantz, and this election would not be about Netanyahu against right-wing, left-wing, not really clear what kind of agenda the Blue and White Party had. But let's just imagine and speculate how it would look if he would have a real opponent on the other side who represents a traditional party who used to be in government and who used to be in control and has a real agenda. So I think that Avi Gabay has most of the blame on the situation. But just to give him some slack, we should say that the results show more than ever that the Israeli Jewish population is very, very right-wing, and it's only growing more and more right-wing over the years. So it's not as if the Labor Party has much to play with. And B, that the Blue and White campaign was very, very ruthless at the end, trying to get votes from the Labor Party and trying to become the largest party and to defeat Netanyahu, and they basically cannibalized whatever was left from the labor support. So most of it is Avi Gabay, and the other part is Benny Gantz. That's the explanation to where the Labor Party is. Avi Gabay today has already started telling some of the labor members that he is considering to resign, and he's considering to give up the leadership. So we may see in the next weeks already very dramatic changes in the Labor Party. But there is a lot of discussion About the need for the Labor and Meretz to join forces and build a new platform, a new left-wing platform, and not divide the same electorate. And there's also a lot of discussion about, could this be the historic end of the Labor Party? Definitely that could also be a scenario that this is basically the demise of the party in the last days that we're seeing.
You spoke a lot about the lack of a platform versus the idea of a party like Labor running with a more coherent message. Do you think that being more of a catch-all party and not having one central theme hurt Kachol Lavan or help them? And do you think that going now into the opposition, do you think how do you think they're going to function? Are they going to be a cohesive entity like other opposition parties have been, or are they going to take another path? They break up. How do you see this going?
First of all, I want to say that unfortunately, and I'm saying this with sorrow, the platform and the ideology wasn't really part of this election. Most of the election, and this is not only in this election, but also in the previous campaigns, most of the elections are about people and personas and leadership. So when you have such a strong leader like Netanyahu, who is already a very, very, probably the most popular Israeli brand and the most well-known Israeli brand all around the world. So when you have a leader who's such a brand, it's really about who is the candidate against him. So I think that first of all, when we want to understand what went wrong with the blue and white campaign, the very sad and simple answer was that Benny Gantz was just not a strong enough candidate. He's very nice, he's very lovable, he's definitely an appropriate persona who has a very impressive experience behind him, but he just wasn't, he didn't have the killer instinct, and he didn't project the killer instinct that is needed in order to beat Netanyahu. And I think that when we look all around the map, we're talking more about, if we put aside the ultra-Orthodox parties, we're talking more about personas and less about ideology at large. That doesn't mean that it's not going to be very challenging and difficult for the blue and white party to go into the opposition. First of all, Benny Gantz is going to be leader of the opposition. I don't think he even knows how to legislate one bill in the Israeli parliament. He has zero parliamentary and political experience, which is problematic. B, his party has about, besides all of the Yesh Atid candidates, most of the people there, 2/3 of the party have no experience in the Knesset, meaning that it'll be quite a rocky ride with them to begin in the Knesset. And 3, which is the biggest problem of this all, is what is going to happen with all of this ego and all of these attributed generals. Are they just going to be simple members of the opposition? To think about someone like Gabi Ashkenazi, a former IDF chief of staff, just sitting on a seat or just being a member of one of the Knesset committees, and it's almost unthinkable. So the challenge will be how to keep everyone inside and together, despite the fact that they're basically sitting in the opposition and they don't really have any influence at all. Another challenge that they will have is to try and resist any attempt by Netanyahu to conquer and divide. If we look back in history, Netanyahu loves taking parties and breaking them up when he needs to, and using parties for his utility. So now Netanyahu is talking about the fact that he wants a very right-wing government, but if circumstances change, he might very well try to divide the blue and white party and maybe lure either Gantz or Lapid to join his government without the other players. So they will have to be very strong to divide, to resist Netanyahu's political manipulations.
So it's given us a pretty thorough post-mortem on what happened to the left and the center in this election. I want to shift over to the right for a moment. One of the big surprises in this election was what happened to Hayamin HaChadash, the new right part, the new party started by Naftali Bennett, Nayelet Shaked, formerly of the Jewish Home Party, who as of now still appear to have missed the threshold and not entered the Knesset. These were some younger politicians who were seen as maybe the next big thing on the right. What happened here? How did they go from being in that position, being expected to jump up and possibly be positioning themselves to take over the Likud after Netanyahu, to not even being in the Knesset?
So I want to say there's still a slight chance that Bennett and Shaked will be entering the Knesset and passing the threshold. The chair of the Central Election Committee basically gave a deadline, which is going to expire in 2 hours, to publish the final results. And just adding that this has been a total farce in the past 24 hours. The counting of the results has been a very embarrassing farce. But Bennett and Shaked, in any case, have already announced that they are going to try and fight and try and find disqualified votes that might help them eventually act the threshold. But let's say that it's a done deal, and even if they eventually do pass the threshold, it's definitely a disappointing result for them. We're talking about probably two of the most dedicated politicians around today, but also very popular politicians. And their whole experiment with the new right eventually turns out to be a complete failure. They had a very bad campaign. It was unfocused, and it was weird, and it was pathetic at times, and it wasn't effective. They left an established party. The Mafdal, or the Jewish Home, is a well-known year-long party which has the establishment and has the mechanism which makes it very easy to wage an election campaign. But Bennett and Shaked very quickly discovered that they have no mechanism in the new right, and they had no one in the field, and they had no one bringing out voters to vote. And at the end of the day, their party was I used to call it's a fake party. It was only them. There wasn't a real party there behind them. And at the end of the day, you need more than images, because elections is about getting out and voting and moving the voters to go to the ballots. Bennett and Shaked were very, I would say, it could be kind of a hybris. Bennett and Shaked were very sure about their popularity, very confident about how popular they were, so confident that they felt okay to just slam the door on the Jewish Home Party. And eventually their voters, their base didn't like it. When you look inside the ballot numbers, you see that in the settlements, almost in every ballot, the other party, the union of the right-wing parties, got more votes than Bennett and Shaked. So they lost their base, they abandoned their base. And last but not least, and this isn't only about Bennett, but it's about all of the parties, is that we saw a very, very aggressive, what we call Gewalt campaign at the last minute by both parties. Both the Likud and the Blue and White Party were basically pumping in the last 48 hours, vote for us, vote for us, vote for us. And this kind of creates a dynamic of a much more bipartisan system. So for the first time in ages, we have two big parties. And the victims, I would say, the tragic victims of this dynamic are all of the small parties around. So this explains also what happens to the Labor Party. It explains Bennett and Shaked. It explains Kahlon. Excuse me. I think that in a way, the Israeli public did send a message to these parties that we prefer to have a more stable and have larger parties than small and sectorial parties.
And speaking of small and sectoral parties, one of those kinds of parties that appears to have survived, and in a kind of reversal of fortunes, is Avigdor Lieberman's Yisrael Beitenu. the party of the Russian-speaking immigrants, and he was in a lot of the polls shown below the threshold. And Bennett and Shaked even did a kind of a last-minute campaign against him, or it appears to have done on election day. But now he's passed the threshold, looking like having 5 seats. And especially if Bennett and Shaked don't make it into the Knesset, then he's positioned to be the kingmaker. But now he's off in Vienna. He went on an impromptu vacation on the last day. So what's he doing there? There's this rumor we've now heard. Did he meet with Lapid? What is he expected to demand? And if he joined a right-wing government, how would he square with the ultra-Orthodox? Because the ultra-Orthodox have their best showing, really impressive showing of 16 seats total, whereas Lieberman campaigned on being very secular and against the ultra-Orthodox leadership. So how does this all mesh together?
So first of all, as you did, Lieberman did take off on a plane last night to Vienna. This is something he does after every election. He just disappears for a vacation immediately after the elections, which I think is kind of lovable in a way, or is especially understandable. It was a difficult campaign for Lieberman as well. Netanyahu, this whole Gewalt campaign that Netanyahu waged was very strong in the Russian base and in the Russian electorate, and Lieberman barely survived. And yes, he found, he basically said, he's angry and mad at Netanyahu for kind of trying to ruin him. So basically, he woke up yesterday morning and said, I understand Netanyahu really wants me to be here and really wants me to give him my reputation. Really not in his pocket. I'm going to go and let him sweat. And just to say something about Lieberman is one of the only actors in the Israeli political system who really has the guts to play games with Netanyahu. And if we go back to 2015, I should remind that Lieberman kept Netanyahu waiting until the last minute, and then 2 days before the deadline was over, told him, yeah, I'm not going to join your coalition. I'm going to sit in the opposition. And basically Netanyahu had to start out with the coalition of 61 members and wait almost a year till he got a wider government. So Lieberman has proved in the past that he's not afraid of sitting in the coalition, even if in the opposition, even if the only reason to do it is to make Netanyahu's life harder. They have a very interesting dynamic in their relationship, and Lieberman is probably the most difficult player. With Lapid, I don't know about a rumor. Lapid fell this morning as well to his own vacation. If you ask me, I doubt it that they're meeting in Vienna right now. I know that Lapid eventually is supposed to end up in Paris, so I don't think that's where they're going. But Lieberman and Lapid are probably enjoying the rumors going around because they know that also annoys Netanyahu. Because the idea is that since Lieberman is not Russian, in the current situation, as you said, he's definitely the king. Now doesn't have a government without him. So there's a lot of pressure on Lieberman to try and shift the government away from this very ultra-Orthodox government, try to create a unity government, even though at the moment he's not necessarily inclined to do so. Lieberman's demands, the most problematic demand, I would say, is the ones that has to do with the ultra-Orthodox parties, and that is the big problem. Lieberman has only basically one agenda, which he has been loyal to over the years, and that is a very secular, anti-Haredi agenda. One of his demands is to have a veto on anything that has to do with state and religion. He had that in the last coalition, and it made things very difficult for Netanyahu. Another demand is that he wants to pass the inscription bill that he already originated and already drafted when he was in the defense ministry. He wants to pass it without any change. the ultra-Orthodox parties have already said that. We also have a Supreme Court ruling and a deadline that has to do with the conversion bill. Lieberman and the ultra-Orthodox parties are also clashing over the conversion bill. So the fact that Lieberman is A, playing games, and B, poses a challenge for the ultra-Orthodox dominance in Netanyahu's coalition makes him probably the most important or most interesting player right now around. And I really don't know how to say where this will end. We should just say that since he is a kingmaker, if he doesn't join Netanyahu's government eventually, if the results stay the way they are right now, he won't have a majority and he won't be able to swear in the right-wing government that he's planning to establish.
That's definitely something to keep an eye out on, especially given Lieberman's kind of erratic record on this issue, as you've elaborated on. Another thing, phenomenon that we saw on the right in this election was this mainstreaming of annexation. Now, it wasn't the central issue of the election. As you've said, the election was very much about personalities, not about policies. But we did see last year, the Likud, or a little over a year ago, the Likud Central Committee endorsed annexation. All the Likud MKs running for re-election, including Netanyahu in the last minute, endorsing annexation. Multiple parties, Zehut, the New Right, the Union of Right parties that support annexation running in the election. These are parties that are supporting the formal absorption of the West Bank into Israel. How does this play out after the election? How much of this was politicking? How much of this is sincere? And Netanyahu in the past has sort of blocked the more hardcore annexation moves, but given his tenuous legal situation and the 3 pending indictments that he's facing, is he in a weaker position on this issue?
Well, I don't think he's in a weaker position. He's just playing with his cards more generously, and his calculations are a bit different. I think the answer is yes, it's a political move that was a campaign move that was aimed at bringing right-wing voters. But I think that it's not only a political move, it also probably does have some essence and some real policy behind it. I think that Netanyahu is basically offering the very right-wing parties, the deal that he's offering is, okay, I'm going to annex some, he's not going to annex the whole West Bank. He might annex some of the blocks or some of the communities in the West Bank, and in return you will give me immunity and let me continue to sit even after I stand to trial. So that's the basic deal that's being discussed. But that deal depends on a very big game changer that could come up even in the upcoming weeks, and that is the ultimate deal. And we don't know how this plays into the ultimate deal. There is a wide assumption that perhaps the Trump peace plan will just include annexing some parts of the West Bank, and that's how Netanyahu will be able to pass it over with his right-wing electorate. But there have also been reports that the Trump peace deal will include at least some Arab and Palestinian neighborhoods of Jerusalem moving over to the Palestinian Authority. And I don't see Bezalel Smotrich or Rafi Peretz or any right-wing settler leader really being able to live with any change to the Jerusalem status and staying inside a government that will do it. Another option that is being floated in the air is that Trump might present a peace plan, but the Palestinians will eventually say no. And then perhaps Israel will get some kind of okay from the United States to move forward with limited moves of annexation or applying sovereignty. I can say that after that Netanyahu does plan to build on the historic precedent of the Golan Declaration as a precedent that proves that there is a way in which an occupied territory can be eventually recognized as being under Israel's sovereignty. When he came back from the White House and the Ramat Golan Declaration, he said that the importance of the declaration and the importance of the fact that the United States is recognizing Israel's sovereignty on the Golan Heights is means that there can be an understanding that you can still keep an occupied territory. And I think that's the logic that he hopes to apply in some places in the West Bank.
Right, and I think we're in totally different territory now with Netanyahu's legal situation, where he might actually make a big move along that line of thought. So, and with all of our work that we do at Israel Policy Forum following annexation, this is something that over the next couple months and next years, depending how long a government lasts, if it's formed, is something that we're going to be watching with great attention and great concern. Last question I want to, for our audience, this is my last question for Tal, and then I'm going to hand it over to the audience. On the right side of your screen, you see a chat box. You can type your questions in there, and we'll select some of them to turn over to Tal. But my last question is one that's sort of, beyond left, beyond right-wing partisan politics, is about the community politics of Israel's Arab minority. This election saw a really low turnout in the Arab sector. You saw this controversy now with a PR firm that may have that brought these hidden cameras to spy on the Arab voters. There was the breakup of the joint list of Arab parties. How did we end up in a situation where we had 49% Arab turnout compared to, I think, over 60% in the last election?
I'm not sure that the final turnout is 49%. I think that eventually it was a bit higher. It was a bit over 50. And I'm also not sure about the 60% of the last election. But there's a conventional wisdom going around that there was extremely low turnout in the Arab communities. I'm not sure. We still have to wait for the final results. But from what I heard today, it wasn't as low as the media has portrayed it. There was a time at about 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon that, yes, the turnout was low, but from what I understand, this is traditional voting pattern in the Arab society, that they come between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night, and then they bring the percentage up. But that being said, yes, it's clear that we're seeing a steady decline in the Arab voter turnout, and this reflects a sad situation in which more and more Arab Israelis are drifting away from their sense of being part of the democracy and feeling as equal citizens, and this in a way is the effect of the nationality bill, the fact that they feel like they're being pushed out of the Israeli society and of the Israeli fabric. This also could be a vote of no confidence in their own parties. We saw the joint list break up into two different parties, the joint Arab list, but it's not as if there are dramatic new faces or stars on the map. And I think this is where the Zionist parties need to, go through some kind of soul searching and learn something for the next time, is the fact that both the Labor Party and the Blue and White Party, which are supposed to pose an alternative to the very divisive rhetoric that Netanyahu has been spreading towards the Arabs, they do not counter. They're too afraid to counter that narrative that tries to present the Arab population as enemies and as unequal citizens. And they didn't have any Arab candidates on their list, which is, I think that's a tragedy. The fact that the Jewish Zionist Party, the Labor Party, which almost every election had a candidate that represented the Arab population, didn't have one this time. And the fact that everyone is drifting to the right means that the divisive rhetoric, Netanyahu's very mean and divisive rhetoric, which is definitely inflammatory and inciting towards the Arab population. Nobody is really doing it. So it's not as if the average young Arab Israeli, even when he looks around, he doesn't see anyone who really even cares about him in the Jewish population, and that I think is the saddest part of the situation.
No, it's definitely a built-in disadvantage that the Jewish Zionist left comes into in these elections, is the relationship with the Arab parties, with the Arab community. And maybe it's something that'll change, maybe not. Along those lines, and talking about the viability of the left bloc, the center-left bloc in Israel, we have a question from Jonathan Camel. Does this election mark the end of the Israeli center-left bloc, or has it been just reconstituted in the Kachol Lavan, which cannibalized votes from some of the smaller parties?
Kachol Lavan is not a left party. Kachol Lavan has some left-wing elements, but they're not vocal, and they're not prominent, and they're not influential. Kachol Lavan is supposedly more left and moderate than Netanyahu and the Likud, because we have 3 former IDF chief of staffs, and they have a different strategic approach because of towards the Palestinians. But Kachol Lavan has Moshe Ya'alon, who is one of the most right-wing politicians in Israel today, and members of his party who are influential inside the party are also very, very right-wing. So Kachol Lavan is not a right-wing, is not a left-wing party. It's totally a center party and center-right, if it tilts anywhere. That was intentional. We know that both Lapid for years and Gantz in this campaign has been trying to become more right-wing than Netanyahu, luring voters. That didn't happen eventually. They didn't really hurt the right-wing bloc, but they definitely are not a left-wing party. And about what happened with and about the left-wing bloc, both the Labor Party and Meretz, I think that this is a wake-up call for both of the parties, that they need to get together and they need to get a real ideology and platform together to be proud of their left-wing identity and their left-wing ideology, and put it out there, and not keep themselves in internal fighting over the same base. At the end of the day, if we see a trend and direction going into major parties, then that's the direction that the left-wing parties have to go into if they want to survive.
And speaking of the merger or potential merger of smaller parties into larger parties, on the other end of the political spectrum, Florian asks us about Kachlon and the small Kulanu party, and whether they're going to merge with the larger right-wing Likud party of Benjamin Netanyahu. Is that something that you see panning out? We've heard some news about that today.
Well, the news is coming from the Likud, so take it with a grain of salt. So here's the deal. First of all, Netanyahu for years has been dreaming of establishing what he calls the new Republican Party. And basically, essentially, that means that Netanyahu, even after the 2015 election, tried to bring Kachlon and Lieberman to join the Likud party for him to have a larger party and to, again, create a larger bloc and power. And he ended with an outstanding surface. And since Kachlon, like Lieberman, like Bennett, has finished basically the campaign with his tongue outside energy, almost didn't survive this Gevald campaign. He's in trauma. So basically we see the Likud really trying to embrace him and bring him back home and let him join the party, give him whatever he wants in order to make themselves larger. I'm not sure that is necessary. Kachlon basically, there are people around him who say that that's the best thing, that after such a traumatic campaign. He should be looking forward to the next campaign. And if this is the message to the small parties, yes, he should join the Likud. But that also means that Kachlon will be giving up on one of probably his most important election pledge, and that was that he is basically the only one who said that Netanyahu will not be able to continue sitting as prime minister under trial. So from Netanyahu's point of view, bringing him into the Likud is really perfect because it will make it much easier for him to try and get or achieve some kind of immunity. But from Kachlon's point of view, he will be losing much of the independence that he has gained in the past 4 years. And I think he's going to be more cautious, but definitely there's a lot of pressure from the Likud on Kachlon to join him, to come back home, basically, because Kachlon started out in the Likud.
You mentioned Kachlon's opposition or potential opposition, because it was something said during the campaign, so maybe take it with a grain of salt. His stance on an immunity law or an immunity policy for Benjamin Netanyahu. What about the position of the courts? Alex asks us, on what basis would the Supreme Court rule on any kind of immunity law, whether it's the French law or revision to the members of Knesset immunity law from 2005?
I think I'm sorry that I don't know the answer, because I don't know exactly how this is going to play out, and Netanyahu has several options to try and get immunity, as you said, and I'm not sure that necessarily the Supreme Court will be able to say anything about all of them. I think that it's also going, if at the end of the day we are now going to end the results with a coalition of 64 seats, or 64, not 65, 64, that means that Netanyahu is in a very bad situation, because it means that he has a lot of small parties that each one of them can bring down. So we might find it more difficult than he thought to try and get immunity eventually.
And whether or not he's able to achieve immunity will really dictate how long his government lasts, if he's able to form another government. When he does get around to bringing up a coalition, what kind of longevity do you see for this government? Do you think it'll be a short-lived government? Do you think it'll last long? And is that an issue for the other party?
I'm going to give you a spoiler, a very non-diplomatic answer right now, but I have no idea. I mean, the assumption is that the timetable says that by July or September, Netanyahu has to go through a hearing. So then you get a few more months until the Attorney General decides if to indict him or not. But after this election campaign, which has been definitely crazy, and there have been a lot of unexpected things that happened, I don't know, a lot of things can happen in the time up until then. So yes, there's one assumption that says this is a government that will only last a year, but it could also last totally 4 years, the total of 4 years. It really depends on how Netanyahu plays his cards, and it also depends on the final results. For instance, if by any chance Bennett and Shaked do pass the electoral threshold, Netanyahu will be in the perfect situation, because he will have many partners in which none of them has any power to actually bring him down. So he can just play with them like puppets. And in that case, very likely he could even conclude 4 years.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of different options. And I know that we can't necessarily predict the future or give an exact forecast, but that definitely gives us a good idea of the different ways he could go, Netanyahu could go, in trying to keep his government together going forward. I just want to remind again attendees that we're taking questions from the audience now. You can send your questions into the chat box that would be on the lower right of your screen. And we now have a question from Ralph. about the left and the Arab parties. He wants to know if there's any possibility of some kind of alliance between Meretz, the kind of leftmost Zionist party, and Hadash, the Arab Communist Party. And he mentions that Meretz had two prominent Arab candidates on its list and got some of the Arab votes. Or on the flip side, if that doesn't happen, is there a possibility of an alliance between Meretz and Labor, which I think you've spoken a little about those sorts of possibilities on this call.
I think that the Meretz Labor alliance is much more likely than a Meretz Hadash alliance, given that Hadash is already in an alliance with Ram Tal, which is not a mixed or joint Jewish Arab party, but an only Arab party. And it's true that Meretz wisely, by the way, had one Arab candidate and one Druze candidate on their list, and that actually brought them votes. And we will commend them for being the only Jewish party besides Hadash who thought about the Arab population. I don't see them joining forces with Hadash. I think it's much more likely that they will be eventually find themselves with the Labor Party, and I think that's also the natural move.
Yeah, you see now the Labor Party with just one more seat than Meretz. Meretz is traditionally the smaller left-wing party, and Labor being a party of government. So it will be interesting to see how their relationship plays out, how they relate to each other. We have another question from Jonathan about the relationship between American Jewry and Benjamin Netanyahu going forward. We know this has been a very polarizing relationship. People have strong feelings one way or the other about Netanyahu, especially in the US Jewish community. And he wants to know, will American Jews, or should American Jews separate Netanyahu's rhetoric in the campaign from what he's going to do in government, or can they expect the rhetoric to kind of match where the government is going to go? And along those lines, if that is the case, is there anything from the United States at the government level, probably not with this administration, that's my addition, or in the Jewish community that could be done that would prevent annexation from a right-wing government?
So the wishful thinking would be to say that Netanyahu will have a different rhetoric after establishing the government, but I don't have any evidence to support that state of mind. The truth of the matter is that the government is with a much more stronger ultra-Orthodox presence and a much stronger right-wing presence. It's true that eventually Itamar Ben-Gvir and Otzma Yehudit are not, in the end, part of the Knesset, but Bezalel Smotrich is going to be a minister in Netanyahu's government, and the ultra-Orthodox parties are much stronger. So I have to say that I don't foresee very good direction that this, or any impact this will have on the relationship between Israel and American Jewry. On the contrary, I believe that attempts on the Kotel, on any work that has been done on the Kotel, or on conversion, or on things that have to do with liberal issues of religion, of state, it'll be much more difficult to move forward with them. I think that the whole secular liberal life in Israel, the set of values, which I would say the set of values that connects between American Jews and Israelis has also suffered a severe blow, and the other side of the values is the one that has ended this election with a victory. So I don't predict that there's any chance for a renaissance in the relationship right now, especially since probably Netanyahu is only going to get much closer and chummier, or and warmer with the White House as your elections approach. So I expect the divide to only get wider, unfortunately. I don't know about American Jewry and how American Jewry pressure can prevent future annexation of the West Bank. But I do think that if the White House is against annexing the West Bank, Netanyahu will not annex any part of the West Bank. So I guess that's the path of pressure that I would recommend. It has to go through the White House.
And with this White House and this administration, it's maybe difficult to see that happening, but it'll, if this government, depending how long it lasts and depending how the American elections play out, we'll see how Israel relates to future United States administration. So with that, I think we have a pretty clear picture, as clear a picture as we can get in the kind of crazy world of Israeli politics, of where the elections are going to, or where the direction of the next government is going to be going, where all the different players from the elections stand now, a couple days after the voting is over. And so I want to thank you. I want to thank you, Tal Shalev, for joining us on this call. Again, Tal is the Walla News political correspondent and has been a great part of our 120 project, our elections resource. And you can access that on our website, www.israelpolicyforum.org/elections. And that is going to remain up there, even though the voting is over, as we go into coalition negotiations. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they have a maximum of 42 days that it could take. It's 28 and a 14-day extension. So this is something that we're going to be watching for the foreseeable future, as Netanyahu vies to form a coalition. And on that website, you can find our videos, podcasts, articles, profiles of the different parties. And I want to thank, by the way, Eli Koaz, our communications director, and Sivan Shalev for their part in helping to put together that resource, because it's been a really useful tool and will continue to be a useful tool that we encourage everyone to check out as coalition negotiations commence. And lastly, I want to remind our audience that we have our Israel Policy Forum Across the Divide event tonight in New York at Temple Emmanuel at 7 p.m., talking about the divide over religious denominations and how they view Israel. Speaking of that American Jewish divide, and we'll also be having an Across the Divide event in Washington next week, Tuesday, April 16th at Adas Israel Congregation. And you can find all of those events on our website, israelpolicyforum.org. So again, thank you all for joining us, and we hope you'll join us on the next briefing call.
Thank you.
Yep.